Good afternoon. Welcome to Bea's MetaQuake Symposium. Today is our panel on how VR schooling could actually increase the digital divide. I'd like to introduce, excuse me, we're having audio issues. Uh, Once again, I would like to welcome you to Bea's MetaQuake Symposium. And we are having a panel today with a distinguished group of people on how VR schooling could actually increase the digital divide. I am Abdul Malik Mahmood of Career Communications Group. I'm the Director of Virtual Reality Programs. And today we are joined by a group of people who are going to break down the metaverse and VR and how that is going to impact VR schooling and some of the things that we'd like to discuss with you, including the production and creation of that content, or how that is going to have how the social impact of that will um, uh, be impacted through various challenges. So again, I would like to pass this mic over to Angie Foss and have her introduce herself first, and the panel will then introduce themselves sequentially, and then we'll begin the discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name's Angie Foss. I work for Autodesk. For those of you who don't know, Autodesk is a software company. We work across a variety of industries, including architecture, engineering, construction, design and manufacturing, as well as media and entertainment. So for those of you maybe in today's audience, you may be familiar with some of our media and entertainment titles like Maya and 3ds Max. Those are two of our popular choices. I work within Autodesk Research. We de-risk some of the potential futures for our company and our customers. I have a very fun and exciting job. One of my main roles is to scout and recruit external teams to join our research residency program. And those residents come from academia, the entrepreneur community, and industry. So I'm happy to share more about that program with anyone who's here today or anyone online. Feel free to hit me up on LinkedIn. And I'm very excited to be on this panel with such esteemed panelists.
Thank you, Angie.
Hi, my name is Meredith Conitz. I am the owner and CEO of Art, Play, Learn. We're an education services company that provides experiential learning in a student centered way, both live and remotely. We are also in the process of developing an EdTech arm. And so our mission really, our core mission is to increase equity in and through education. And so that's why we're here today, is to speak to the ways that EdTech can further equity or can potentially get in the way if we're not careful and mindful about how it's implemented, how it's built, and how it's delivered. So I'm excited to be here today. If anybody's interested in looking up our programs, you can find us at artplaylearn.com.
Hey everyone, thanks for having me. I'm Dr. Hassan Brown, CEO of CareerCatalyst.org. And at Career Catalyst, what we're really focused on is providing inspiration and information to young people from underserved communities, underserved schools. This includes youth programs, high schools, middle schools as well. And while we focus on these careers or jobs of the future of work, if you will, we're looking at science, technology, engineering, the arts, and math as vehicles to careers that offer opportunities for gainful employment, and in many ways addressing some of the income and generational wealth gaps that have been systemic, endemic, and very much part of this country's history. Um, Folks who look like, some of us on this panel have been institutionally and historically locked out of some of these opportunities. We think about the industrial era. There weren't many people who looked like, some of us on this panel who were participating there. And so the idea is really like, allowing young people, Black and brown folks, people of color, to have not just a seat at the table, but leading in conversations and leading communities and coalitions as we look to the future of work in the emerging, not industrial age, but information age. And to learn more, you can head to careercatalyst.org.
Hey guys, I am Dr. Charlie Kemp, Chief Revolutionary Officer and Executive Director of Change the Tune. Change the Tune is an organization that seeks to revolutionize the education space through the after school and summer learning space. So we teach and we also run direct programs in the after school and summer learning space. A little bit of data just so people to situate the panel and the group. Kids spend about 80% of their waking hours outside of school, and the upper income spend 9 times the amount of the low income on outside of school activities. So by the sixth grade, that amounts to about 6,000 more hours for upper income youth over lower income youth. There's also non-white school districts get about $2,600 less per pupil. And so that's the equivalent of the cost of an after school program. And so when we think about our after school programs, we are about building not just things that replicate the current system, but like revolutionary spaces. And so imagine Harvard Business School meets Juilliard meets Core Power Yoga together to build your next future leaders, designing solutions for the future. And so that's what we do with Change the Tune. And to learn more about us, you can visit us at www.changethetune.org.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Once again, we're going to begin with our discussion by first giving a background on some of the technologies here. You know, AR, VR, XR are terms that are used commonly these days, but we just want to define that just briefly so that any audience members who are not clear on those terminologies can understand. AR, or augmented reality, is essentially putting a virtual layer over the reality that you view or perceive. Whereas VR, virtual reality, is creating a virtual experience or a virtual environment that you then use either technology like such as glasses or even a video screen like a computer game to immerse yourself into a virtually real environment. The object of the technology is to immerse yourself as much as possible in the experience such that it feels like a real thing or that like you're really there. And XR is a term talking about mixed reality, which is, mixed. XR incorporates mixed reality. It extends reality such that you're using AR, VR, and XR technologies to increase your immersion level in an experience to make it more believable. Commonly, we have tools like the Oculus Quest headset that allow you to walk around and experience an environment in real time, which is, by increasing your senses, your eyes, your hearing, and sometimes even touch through haptic feedback or other devices that give you a tactile feedback. Uh, the more that you can fool your senses into believing in the experience, is the more we have a virtually real experience, or the more that we augment what we're experiencing in reality through overlays with technology and data, is the more we have an augmented experience. So, and again, we could advance the slides. We just have a few brief images of those technologies in use. And the metaverse is essentially an iteration of the internet where we now bring together the foundational technologies of web pages, including images and sound and video, HTML, and now we're extending that technology using 3D applications, virtual reality, augmented reality, to create an environment where people are interacting in real time. People are sharing video, people are sharing chat, people are sharing data and information. So the metaverse is a tool potentially that can be an educational tool, an entertainment tool, and it spans different communications media and different abilities that you can now utilize in an educational space as well as an entertainment space. Of course, our focus here is on how that technology is going to be impacting virtual reality and how that's going to be impacting schooling and education. So now we're going to really get into the discussion of what we call the digital divide. The divide is essentially with these technologies, with this experience, there's a great potential for education and using those experiences to get a more rich teaching experience. But there's also challenges, such as accessibility, equipment. We talked about different demographics that may not have access to certain tools. So we really want to explore that in our discussion so that we can explore what the digital divide is in more depth and how we can, bridge that gap and use this technology efficiently to become a better learning experience. So we have several questions that we're going to begin with. And my panel is my wonderful, energetic panel is now ready for a discussion, and we are going to have some fun now.
Hold that thought
So,
just one second. They didn't get to see the slides. I think, sir,
oh,
can you advance them to the images for us and just click
thank you.
slowly through them?
Yes, as you can see on the screen now, I'm sorry, we have it advanced now to the point where you can see um, with the first image is a gentleman wearing it looks like haptic feedback gloves as well as a VR headset. There's a close up there on the VR headset so that you can actually see. Most people are familiar with these days. Thanks to Oculus Quest 2 and a lot of the gaming and VR, Meta, Facebook. The technology of the headsets has now become more efficient than they were years ago. And of course, traditional gaming or screens can be used as a virtual experience as well. It's not as immersive because, as we said, the terminology immersive deals with the level of believability. But these technologies all have various depths, and that's essentially the key: is to match the depth of technology with what your experiential goals are for your learning. So let's go ahead and advance to the next slide if we can. Okay, again, that was a brief talk about the metaverse. That's our definition of the metaverse, as we talked about. Can we advance again? Okay, right. One more. Okay, so what are the resources needed to create VR schooling? Um, I would love to see if Dr. Hassan, would you like to take that topic?
Get the mic.
The microphones, yes. Make sure we speak into them as best we can, too.
So I'm sure you're probably expecting my response that I would lead with something around tech and infrastructure, but I'm actually not. Um, One of the biggest resources, and having worked in schools as an administrator, as a teacher, um, staffing is actually like the biggest piece. I worked in schools where we've had a great public and private partnerships, where it's we get iPads or computers or really innovative programs. We wouldn't have like the staff to actually implement these programs, right? And so part of that comes from not just when we think about partnerships and how to really bring VR and technology period into schools, is doing it in a way where we're not parachuting these potential solutions, but we're actually working in concert, collaborating with school leaders, with teachers to understand what is your context, right? What do you need? And if possible, maybe we provide a staff person, right? Or in some ways, maybe provide workshops to educate the teachers. Let's provide the supports that are needed on the ground to ensure that that's fertile soil for this partnership, right? Once we have staffing in place, now we can talk about the software and the programs and all that. Um, so staffing meaning a staff person or team at the school who's trained. I think having a liaison between whatever the tech provider is and the school, the institution of learning is also key because you're going to have instances where you may need to reach out to either the service tech or just if it's a if it's a corporation, if it's a business, having a human being, because at the end of the day, it's really about relationships that sustain these things. And then on the tech side, bandwidth, right? Number one thing that um, we often take for granted, we assume that every school has access to internet, right? And some I worked in schools where certain parts of the building had internet, but others did, right? So that's a real issue. And we also have to think about the rural context. Um, how are we getting bandwidth and technology and capacity to different pretty much we don't want to exacerbate or exacerbate the digital divide, if you will, right? Um, so bandwidth is a huge piece. Staffing is another piece, and then other infrastructure pieces. I would say um, having the headsets, right? Having the proper software, partnering with companies that um, enter into these relationships with schools in a space where they have an asset-based approach that goes back to the relationships, and then with infrastructure, having VR rigs and those other pieces. But yeah, I was it's really those three buckets that come to mind. Making sure the school has the capacity to support this initiative. Um, Ensuring that the relationship is there between the providers and the customers, in this case the schooling context, and then the hardware piece the headset, the rigs, and making sure that the funding is sustainable so that it's not a project that we have for 1 year, because then that exacerbates the issue where kids who are here now get the experience, but what about the grades behind, right? So really thinking about making this not like a one shot, but how do we build sustainable practices and really building like relationships and community as we engage in these sort of initiatives together.
That's an excellent answer. I think you hit all the major points there. Does anybody else want to elaborate or have any other comments?
I'm happy to add in. I think one piece I want to elaborate on is the training piece. I think that a lot of times, like even in the pandemic, if you watch some of the kids really their test scores, they've come back because our unfortunately learning how to use technology while on the fly in the middle of a pandemic didn't happen for our teachers. And so really thinking through what does it look like to co-construct with the teaching staff and the students as well in the school based off of their needs, and then thinking about what does it look like to interweave into what's already happening versus this parachute piece that I really wanted to drive in. Like it's one thing to do a 2-day training, here's how to use your VR sets, we set you up, but it's that coaching aspect. Like what unit are you working on? Okay, you are working on the quadratic equation in architecture this week. Okay, so then how do we build in what we're doing with the actual headsets or the augmented reality to be able to do so versus okay, play this game that we designed that we think works for you, but instead a co-constructive process that iterates so that they can adopt different elements and then become masters inside the school of the technology.
Yeah, that's exactly the direction that I was going with it as well. That's part of my experience during the COVID lockdown. So I had actually been teaching over Zoom for several years prior to COVID happening, and was continuing. So I had some remote classes that I was teaching over Zoom and some in-person classes. So when the lockdown happened, I just transitioned everybody to the Zoom side, but our local school system had real challenges on the hardware side, on the bandwidth side. Um, and then the solution appeared to be to just pour as much money as possible into hardware, into getting people connected to the internet, into buying subscriptions to 25 random apps that really nobody really knew what they actually did, and then putting together webinars to train the teachers on how to use all of these digital tools. But the missing piece was that there was nobody to teach the teachers how to implement a lesson plan. How do you create a lesson plan that you're going to deliver over a video conference software package? And how do you execute that in a way that mimics to the best degree possible an in person experience, and that leverages the fact that you're actually on a video conference? Right? Because there's some things that you can do over Zoom, over Teams, over whatever that you can't do in person, and vice versa. And I had found that it's actually there's not that much of a disparity between teaching in a really good interactive lesson in person versus over Zoom. Um, but you just need to know what those small adjustments are. And had they been willing to, I happen to have a PD that I put together that was only 3 hours. And I was willing to teach anybody who wanted it how to make this adjustment. And I had a really hard time getting any of the school districts to invest any time or money in that because they just didn't see that that is literally the key to being able to educate through a virtual classroom, as opposed to having lots of bells and whistles and lots of fancy things, um, that you're then saying, okay, to the students, um, okay, so here's a PowerPoint slide about this thing, and now here's an app that you're going to log into, and you're going to work on this app on your own. And then for a while, the teachers couldn't even see what they were doing. And even once they developed, the technology was developed that they could see what everybody was doing on their computer, it still, you have students who don't understand how to have two windows open at the same time. So they open the app and now they think they're not in the meeting anymore. Right?
Right.
Like literally. Um, there are some people who can't figure out how to log in. We had multiple times where the credentials we were given didn't work, or whatever the app or the game or whatever it is, because it was dropped on them. It wasn't aligned with their content. It wasn't aligned with the curriculum. It wasn't aligned with the level that each student was on. So some kids were having problems because it was too hard. Other kids were having problems because it was way too easy. Um, and really, all it would have taken would to have the training and to have people who could say to a teacher, okay, what are you teaching tomorrow? Oh, here's a tool that you can use, and here's how you can structure the lesson so that it can be effective.
Right. So again, so the resources here in terms of personnel, it seems like, we have an educational goal, but sometimes that can be lost in the excitement of, oh, there's a new technology, there's a new bell and whistle. We're distracted by that, and we haven't prepared our teachers on how do you use this to accompany, your lesson plan, the years of training that you've put into this subject in terms of how you impart this knowledge to the students. And we really, again, that's a major thing. We don't want to undermine the education. We want to enhance it. So again, excellent points in terms of the resources. Personnel is number one. Planning out the educational plan, the curriculum, planning out your goals, and then of course preparation. Preparation really makes things flow. If you don't have the preparation, then things can kind of go off. So again, I think that we've really got some great points on that.
I will
one
just
addition. Oh,
Oh, we
sorry,
might have two
Tyler.
additions.
I worked in higher education for many years, and in that space, the students are often an overlooked asset. Your students are like playing in their dorms on their Oculus headset, or now they've got access to roommates and other students who maybe have that technology or that experience. And so at the higher ed level, I would also heavily encourage consult your students. Like they'll have them support the building of the curriculum, have them really um, lead faculty and staff to directions that they are newbies in. So anyway, go ahead, Charlie.
You literally took the words from me.
Oh.
And that's a great point, because why shouldn't the child also be part of their education? Why shouldn't they also be pushing and leading that? We're supposed to be encouraging them to be excited about this and interested in their own future. Why not ask them what they need, what they see? My background also, I was a 3D animation teacher, and I learned a lot from listening to my students and understanding their perspective. They kind of come in there and just, oh, we're going to do this. A lot of times you kind of may miss the point, and the students can really give you the feedback and the perspective you need to be not only be a better teacher, but to really say, hey, maybe I need to rethink this. This is not working the way I thought it would work. So again, I'm glad we're all kind of in sync on this with these points here. I guess we'll move on to the next discussion topic. Are we ready?
Yeah.
Okay, so how can AR and VR based lessons benefit students in the metaverse? And I think maybe Angie might like to take this.
Yeah, sure. I actually prepared a few slides that we can show now that highlight some current precedents that can kind of show the power of VR in the education space. So you can jump to the next slide. These are kind of like the headers. The first experience here is it's done at a museum, and it's from world-renowned Alejandro Iñárritu. Iñárritu. He is an Academy Award-winning director. Hassan, what were those movies we were talking about that he's known for?
Spotlight. No. So Birdman
Birdman.
and
Okay.
The Revenant with Leo DiCaprio. Y'all know that one, like the big bear who like pretty much destroys him in the woods. That's the movie. Yeah.
So this is a VR experience that he put together that is following the experience of what it might be like to be an immigrant or a refugee here in the United States. And I show this as an example of like how powerful virtual reality can be, because it immerses you in another human being's experience in a different way than we have today by watching a video or having a conversation. You're really put into the point of view of another individual. And I think for a learning and education experience, that's pretty powerful. So that was one that I wanted to highlight. The next slide, you can actually skip to. that's just another image, is highlighting that virtual reality can help us go to places you wouldn't otherwise be able to go. So this is another high fidelity museum experience, but it kind of speaks to that ability through this one, which is space exploration. Imagine if you have a classroom full of students and you want to take them to the space station. These are the types of things that VR can power and give you teleportation capability through virtual reality. And then the last one, which is one more slide, I have a rendering from one more slide. Um, this is actually an Autodesk product called the Wild. It's current and live, and it highlights how virtual reality can really enable teams to collaborate at a distance. Like you could be in California, where I live, or you could be here in DC. And together you could do some design and collaboration and team building. This is a architecture product. So this is for people in the field of architecture, engineering, and construction and design and collaboration. So it just kind of shows this is a current product on the market today. So these are the types of things that we could see in classrooms in the next 5 years. And the power that that would give teams and students could really change, right? Like you could really have your students interacting with folks at a distance or elsewhere in the world. So I just wanted to highlight those in terms of how virtual reality really can power pretty remarkable learning experiences, no matter where you are in the world. Anybody else have any thoughts?
So, as someone who creates experiential and highly interactive programs, I can see a lot of really interesting possibilities. Like I would love to be able to bring my Japanese language students to a virtual restaurant and have them actually practice their ordering and all of their language that we're learning about how to navigate a restaurant experience and actually be able to like look around and see the way things would happen in a restaurant in Japan, for example. That would be really cool. Um, yeah.
A couple things. One, when you were showing the video, it reminded me we ran a virtual summer camp during COVID, and our kids use Roblox to come up with a design for. So we teach kids. We call them social justice business plans, and so they have to design solutions to address the sustainable development goals. One of their issues they were looking at was equity and racial equity. So they designed a whole childcare center that was for all. And so they did this on Roblox, and it very similarly looked like this, and they created their own reality. And so if we thought about a way in space, if we're thinking about kids becoming leaders, the chance for them to collaborate, it was a group of 3 or 4 girls, middle schoolers, already getting into the design principles, which I think is pretty critical. And then I think the other piece is a lot of our education spaces sit and get. Like I think what triggered Angie, and maybe for me, when we were talking about students being able to help, you said the word impart, but I think it's important we like decenter the teacher and we understand that learning is an ecosystem. And so when we create these tools, students are nimble because they're younger, they're not as scared of the technology and what it's going to do. So they are first to move and they're able to learn and think and create leadership inside the classroom. So those are just some thoughts.
Those are qualities that we're looking for in the students, right?
And just to kind of a thread that's coming up from Angie, which you shared. So the wild, that looks pretty awesome. It looks wild. If I can get on there, sign me up. And I love the idea of these social justice business plans. I would love to like learn more about that. Meredith, you share like about your experience, like with in Tokyo, and I think about like I mean, I'm probably dating myself, but remember like having pen pals back in the day when like you'd write to like someone who was like from a different community, probably different state from you, right?
Different country.
Different country, right? And so that's what VR and AR really affords us, right? As you think about 21st century skills around collaboration, critical thinking, communication, all those things, right? Um, you can do that on 10 with VR because like you're not bound by demography, geography, right? So what would it be like to be working to be collaborating on a project with a group of students in Spain, right? A group of students in Tokyo, and oftentimes like we even like when I mean back in the day like with the pen pal projects, we were often communicating with students who were in a different context from us, but still drinking the same water, for lack of a better term. Like we're still in the same state, but like different socioeconomic status. But Japan and Brooklyn, I mean, well, Tokyo and Brooklyn, right? Just kind of bring it down, but it it gives you a chance or a space to really test those like cross cultural and learning opportunities, right? So like I think like that's really a huge piece of like what the VR and AR environment allows us to do. Like it really is it's boundless in many ways.
I really love that. Again, I had a pen pal from Germany, but using those virtual experiences, like to engage their minds, but also to create a cultural experience where now you're engaging with other people from around the world with a different experience. I did a lot of gaming back in the old days before I became a serious games developer, and I remember playing video games and actually meeting people in the games.
What's your favorite game?
Oh, you don't want to ask me about that. We'll be here for days. I mean, first of all, I used to love flight sims. Like, I think I've flown everything. I love aviation. I studied all kinds of like manuals. I was training my friends back when I was in engineering school to do MMNs, and like we're it's like Top Gun. We're coming in there like banking. But anyway, also too, I wasn't really into first person shooters at first, but once I played Aliens versus Predator, being able to become another life form and inhabit that skin,
With the lights on or off? That game
man,
was scary as hell.
that was one of the scariest games with alien life cycle. Base suckers. We'll talk about more about that after the panel. But again, again, those gaming experiences brought me together with other people. So we were having connections offline. We were talking about how to develop these games and how what we're doing for dinner and like what our lives were like. So there's that element to it in terms of connecting with other people, which is I think what we're here for this human experience for. So we don't want technology to take us apart. We've seen that in the pandemic where, people being apart isn't necessarily the healthiest thing or the best thing for us. So we really want this technology to bring us together. And for me in the training space, serious games, having a space where you can practice or do operations like in a safe space where you're not gonna, oh gosh, I just blew up something. Having that safe space to learn and practice is how you develop your mind and expand different questions. So yeah, that's pretty much it. You want to
Just name the word that's coming up in the education space that we talk a lot about is social emotional learning and like giving the capacity to develop those skills through this. Like kids in our summer program were like, I didn't know how to talk to other kids. But when you start gaming, y'all, we could go down a whole path here today. And so it just creates many different opportunities.
Yeah, I mean, I would add to both of everything that you said in that. So one of the things that I love about remote education, and one of the reasons why when I got into it, I was like, "Ooh, this is awesome," is I literally had people who were across the world from each other coming together at the same time and learning Japanese with me. I mean, literally, I had a student that was in Estonia, and another student that was in Japan, and another student that was in Italy, and another student that was in Australia, and students that were American, all in the same Japanese class. And being someone who's a world citizen who has traveled and lived on three different continents, it was just the best thing in the world. Um, and so that was one of my arguments through the whole lockdown is like we don't have to be isolated. We have the tools to connect with each other. We just have to be willing to figure out how they work and to make our own space, to make them ours in a way that we can share something special with somebody else.
that makes perfect sense. That's beautifully said as well. I guess that segues us into the next question, which is what challenges to education might VR bring to the classroom? If we could get advance the slide, please. Okay, so I guess Meredith, like, would you like to continue with that?
Yeah. So there are a lot of challenges with bringing tech into the classroom. And a lot of it has to do with equity. So, in addition to all of the things that we've already talked about, um, students are people, first and foremost, right? And as individual people, we have our own set of obstacles, and everybody has their own unique set of obstacles. And some of the things that people are dealing with are very much challenges to using VR in the classroom. So, for example, we were just talking earlier about the fact that I suffer from vertigo. Putting an Oculus headset on is just a deal breaker for me. I can't do it. And there's actually research out there that says for kids under a certain brain development stage, that it's actually dangerous and really not good for their brain development to be doing it. So that's something that we have to keep an eye on. Also, if you're visually impaired, right? So trying to operate in a VR space with a headset, not sure how that would even work or what benefit people would get from it. Um, and then there's a matter of, the equity issues when it comes to hardware and bandwidth and that sort of thing. Even if you have, there are lots of cardboard VR headsets that you can put on, right? And people are like, oh, it's practically free. Well, it's practically free if you have a device that works in it, right? So, if you don't have the right kind of device, then that's a challenge. And then even if you have the right style of device, if you don't have the right operating system, then that's another challenge. So I think on that level, there are multiple levels of challenges to implementing it at present.
Those are really good points. And the hard part about it is it's so flashy and exciting. Even the examples I showed were like done at high fidelity with a lot of money and like very talented individuals. So when you think about the classroom, you really want to create access and equity, and that is why I like the idea of involving the students, because it's also building the talent pipeline for more of those individuals to continue to move into those industries to support the development. The one thing that I think about, though, that is a challenge is particularly with our young people, is we have all kind of been thrust into this online digital lifestyle, and we're not yet good at it. I mean, we have a lot of risks. Students, post things on social media nowadays that put them at risk for certain things, whether that's cyberbullying or other types of challenges. And my worry about the unknown landscape and virtual reality and the multiple metaverses is that there are new risks that we haven't quite exposed yet, and young people can very well be targets of those risks. And so I think that's another thing to consider. We mentioned the people. You did a really nice job, Hassan, at talking about like people being present when you implement virtual reality into a classroom. And I think that's really important when you think about security and you think about the safety of students. And so that's one that just kind of keeps me up, not only for the classroom, but just for people. Be careful where you play. And anyway, that's something that keeps me up when I think about it.
Yeah, just plus 1,000 on the safety and security piece, especially when we talk about kids. The metaverse, it's new, like you said, it's flashy, Angie. And with that means that right now it's also unregulated, right? And so there are a lot of things happening in the metaverse that we don't even know about yet, right? And so if we unleash this for young people, for kids to as like their playground, they will likely discover things and ways to apply applications for the metaverse that we haven't even thought of, right? Because kids are just like naturally creative in that way. So they'll be the pioneers for this, and it might end up being a tool that does more harm than good. Like Meredith, like you named some really awesome points around like the cycle, like the connections there. And then just also thinking about what is the goal? So as a school leader, if you're thinking about bringing VR or any sort of technology into your school, why? How will it be used? And really getting stakeholder buy-in. Because what you don't want is like, to have a bunch of Oculus rigs or VR, just like boxes of it sitting in your storeroom. We've probably all been to schools where you see tons of awesome technologies, boxes of iPads just in the basement. Whatever happened to it? Oh, we had a program 2 years ago and then, right? And so for schools, like funding is a finite resource. So as you plan to like implement technologies, think about setting like long-term sustainable goals. How will it be used? What kind of impact are you looking for? And then like having like milestones, different checkpoints where you're just kind of tracking. How is it being used? Are we on track for these outcomes? Getting feedback from your constituents, like talking to the kids. Hey, I know we implemented this program like 6 months ago. What's been your experience, right? Um, so really centering student voice and all that, but really just like a plus 1,000 on like the safety piece. Because it's so new, it can be exciting. We can get so caught up and wrapped up in all that, but there's still like a lot that we don't know. So I'm not saying that like that it's a bad thing, but let's just enter into this space with caution.
I'm really piggybacking, but when I was a kid, my mom called the internet as it was starting to get big, the information superhighway. And I just want to acknowledge that our schools from K all the way through the collegiate system have a lot of broken structures. And what happens when you overlay technology is those broken structures are amplified. And so when we are implementing this new technology that's really powerful, as you all have mentioned, we've got to think about where are the broken pieces and how are we using this in a different way.
That's an excellent point. Security, of course, is important because we do see, in this day and age, a lot of bullying, cyberbullying, um, your data breaches and security, and and also too, you don't want to, like, as you said, a lot of times when you don't have the budget or when you don't have the personnel or you don't have the plan, that's how you get storerooms full of VR sets, or that program's been gone for 2 or 3 years because that person left and we didn't have the budget to replace, or we couldn't find anyone to replace. So there's a lot of different challenges to establishing that sustainable type of program. And also too, is it beneficial to the community you're serving? Is it beneficial to the school? Um, that's a question that has to be the focus, because if you're adding extra budget and you're not benefiting anybody, you're hurting yourself.
Yeah, just to add to that, so a lot of times we think about schools as being the driver of the community, but it's actually the opposite, right? The community is the driver of the school, and so it's really important to keep that connection to the community, to talk to the people, to talk to the students, and to the parents about what are your goals, right? What are the things that you want for our community and for our kids, and include them in those discussions. A lot of times, we'll just throw money or throw resources at a school and say, oh, here, you don't have this. Here, take this and do it. But, like if you're giving people bread because they don't have toast, but they don't have toasters, that doesn't
Exactly.
help.
Right.
Right. So there's that too.
That's an excellent point. If you're oh, thanks for all these resources, but I can't use them because I don't have an oven. I've got all these frozen dinners, and wow, it's great. So yeah, that's an excellent point, and something that we definitely should reflect on, going forward. I think now, um, let's let's kind of think about why we have a digital divide overall. Like, what are the main driving features? And if we could advance the slides, um, why do we have a digital divide? We've touched on a lot of different things, from technology to different community challenges to planning and thought. Um, Charlie, would you like to bring us home on that? Let's get
I'll
into it.
start, but clearly the panel has a wealth of knowledge. I'll start actually. So I worked at Green Dot Public Schools for 5 years, and it was called Green Dot Public Schools because the founder Steve Barr looked at a map, and basically there were a bunch of green dots where there was internet, and then red dots where there wasn't internet. And the internet, I'm from LA, was all above this freeway, which is the 10 freeway. So you heard of Beverly Hills. So the internet was all in Beverly Hills, but like if you're like from South Central LA, where I'm from, there weren't the green dots, which means we didn't have access to internet. But what happens in LA is a mirror reflection of this country, where underserved communities don't get access to technology in its basic form, including internet. And so, like, if you go to schools right now today, the internet, as you mentioned, might work on one side of the building and not on the other side of the building, but probably not at Beverly Hills High, or probably not in a well resource neighborhood. And so when we start off first, like, people don't have access to internet. Even in the pandemic, we saw that. Like, we didn't just have to get kids computers, we had to get them internet devices as well. And so when you don't have internet, as I mentioned a couple minutes ago, it's the information superhighway. You have access to Google and you can learn anything and do any level of research resource. But then there are also just the infrastructure elements that are tied to this digital divide. If you don't have internet, then your teachers haven't been trained on using internet tools. And so then it goes on and on in terms of this infrastructure, in terms of this digital divide. And then it's also creating this barrier between the haves and have nots, and also a fear of the tool as well. And so that is part of where I would say it starts, but feel free to add in.
Yeah. So in addition to that, so if you're in a community that doesn't have internet, you probably don't have a whole lot of other infrastructure as well, right? And so even if you get the school through the school, you can get every student a device and every student's household internet. Um, the adults in their household probably don't know how to use these devices very well. They probably don't know how to use modems and routers or what any of that even means. And so you find that even if the students have been trained perfunctorily in school of how to use this stuff, then you send them home. And even if they're coming to school every day, if you're sending them home with these things, they're supposed to be able to use this to do homework. Well, there's a gap, and that's part of what the homework gap is, right? So the homework gap is that people who have financial resources have this um, vast privilege because those kids have access to all of these other resources, including an adult who understands their work and can help them with it and basically be a free tutor for them, or who can afford to pay for a tutor to help them with their homework all the time. Whereas on the other hand, you might have other people who their parents, maybe they know, but they're working 3 jobs, so they're not around to do it. Or the kids come from school and go to their parents' restaurant, and they're doing their homework in the back corner of the diner. I mean, that's something right out of my family, to be honest. Like, that's real, okay? And that's a really important equity issue that people don't necessarily. It doesn't click for them that if the parents, maybe they don't speak English very well, maybe they don't have an understanding of the technology, they can't help the child when the child's knowledge runs out.
Yeah, that's
I just want
that's
to
excellent.
really quickly tap back to that 6,000 hour gap, because that's when it occurs. It's that amplification after school, when kids are spending 80% of their waking hours after, and the halves can amplify. You've got a tutor, you've got this extra experience that's amplifying the digital access versus those who don't.
So, Abdul, the short answer to your question is racism, right?
That's a way to put it.
Right? With a little bit of classism sprinkled on top of it. And so, like, honestly, like, these are all symptoms that we're naming that are very endemic, rooted in the very intentional design of how, like, gerrymandering. The funding models for education for kids in schools, like how the different communities get different access to certain dollars, state, federal, local, all that, right? Um, there are policies that are driving all these things, right? And then, like, on the technical side, we talk about, like, the digital divide. I think about the actual creators behind a lot of the technologies, all the programs, all the tools that are sold or given in kind to schools. They often don't look like folks that look like me, right? So the people who are creating these softwares, they may not be as engaging for a kid. Oh, like, I made this great program for Black and brown kids in Oakland, but the engineers they have no idea about the lived experience of Black and brown kids in Oakland. They've never been in a low SES community. They've never been in a high. Like, they never set foot in a U.S. context, right? Context matters. And so when you're creating, what's the old saying? Like, nothing for me without me. Nothing with for me without me. Whatever it is, right? I don't know.
You get the gist.
You get the
You get the
gist.
gist of it.
But the idea is that when you have people who are creating an experience, a product that is not community informed, then you're going to have outcomes where, like, I'm not going to come to the table and buy this or engage with this because I don't see myself in it, right? I don't see myself in it. I don't see my friends in it. I don't see my family. Like, there's nothing connecting here. And so essentially, like, it feels like you're selling me something, and I'm not buying, right? Both literally and figuratively.
No, I mean, that's excellent. That's an excellent point because again, it goes back to what we were saying about gaming and how that opens up the environment. Well, okay, in your example, you have these developers who don't have the lived experience of talking to other people. So the things that they're creating for other people are based on their like outside perception of someone without having engaged with them, without having understood them or their experience. So then that becomes, oh, let's develop more products that don't serve a community, that don't address their needs or their perspective, which I don't even fathom or understand. And that makes the divide greater because now the products are only serving a certain segment. They're not serving the segment that you intend for them to serve. You're not understanding why. And then you're moving on because we have profit models, we have things that we have to follow, we have to make business moves. So you just step back and go, I don't know what the problem is. Like we tried, we don't know what's happening. And that is really what the digital divide is. Like you're saying, it's all connected. As you said, there's historical elements in terms of policies, in terms of funding, in terms of, um, why we have these historical structures or historical divisions. It's not always intentional, but the system that it's based on was made
Oh, no,
through
no, no.
intentional
It's always
moves. Well,
intentional. It's
no, no,
always
I'm saying
intentional.
with certain developers, they may not have an intention to create that, but because they're in a system that has intentionally created these divisions and created these structures and created this historical problem, it compounds whether they want to whether they want to add to it or not.
These are all really good points, and it is a hard topic to talk about because it is such a challenge. The one thing that we've highlighted that I saw a lot in higher ed that I just wanted to like name was the assumption that young people are like digital experts or like tech savvy. So like freshmen incoming classes, there would be a lot of assumptions both on a curriculum side but also in a student programming side that every single student that stepped on that campus had always had access to a computer, had always had access to a cell phone, and so there was a lot of programming that didn't meet those students where they were, and that continued to compound the digital divide. And then that feeds into those students belonging at an institution, their imposter syndrome potentially as it relates to the discipline that they have dreamed of studying. There's a lot of K through 12 schools who have great programs in STEM. And those students come in and I'm like, whoa, you are more advanced than me. And then there are other communities that do not have that. And so that was always something that I viewed as a big challenge in the higher ed space is really trying to better build and target for students who don't have that access in the younger years.
Yeah, I'm glad because that ties in with what you were saying. Like we have to talk about bias, right? So there are three kinds of bias. There's conscious bias. It's intentional, right? It happens all the time. But it's a reality. Seriously, you have to talk about it. There's subconscious bias where people think they're not being biased, but they are. If we really dig down, you can find it, right? And then there's unconscious bias that everybody has, right? And that's just a function of the way our brains work. That's neurology, right? Our brains like to categorize, and so we're constantly taking in information and categorizing it. And a lot of times our brains are wrong. A lot of times, right? But it's the way our fight and flight kind of mechanism is built on, right? It's how we learn what we need to respond to immediately and what can wait, right? And without understanding what our own individual unconscious biases are or where they could live, that's another actually real danger of VR, because VR is so dependent on AI, and as artificial as we like to think of AI being, it's actually built on what people who built the AI mechanism, what their unconscious bias is, right?
Exactly, those established patterns.
Right, exactly. And so it's a really hot topic right now, and it's a really important thing to pay attention to because way back, I don't know, are you guys old enough to know about garbage in, garbage out? Right, way back when I was younger, people kept talking about garbage in, garbage out. Well, that's a really important thing in AI and ML, right? Because whoever's building that machine to learn is embedding their own unconscious bias in it.
And the data that you're feeding it.
Exactly.
Data is very important with those technologies. And you bring up a good point that it can be heavily biased depending on how it's architected.
And so I think the point that I know we're getting ready to wrap and close is we really have to be intentional. Even when it's unintentional, it still is intentional to your point of this unconscious bias. And it's kind of like if I had a call to action for all of us as we think about doing work in the metaverse and creating these experiences, how can we be intentional about the experiences? There's some frameworks. It's called Equity Meets Design is one, and then Stanford has their own version, Equity by Design. But both of them call the premise is that the world has been designed in a way by a select group of individuals, and it's been racist basically. And so we need to acknowledge the histories that have existed, and when we design new tools, these tools for our colleges, our K through 12 space, we have to think about how do we actually create for all and all abilities, all genders, all races, all. And that also has to be back to this original point we made, like how do you involve the community and creating experiences and tools that can be customized collectively for the community that it's serving.
Yeah, I love that. Angie, did you
I
have
was
some
just gonna
thoughts?
say,
Yeah.
well said, Charlie.
No, that's an excellent point, and I think that is really what brings us here. How can we start to create things that serve, multiple communities, especially communities that have already been experiencing a lack of service or a lack of thought. Again, we're looking at human potential, and we're looking at, a lot of times we see it in our schools. Our students, because they have this not only digital divide but divide in general, their potential is being lost. As a teacher, that was one of the most frustrating things for me is to see students come in where they had kind of been robbed of some of their educational, some of the education encouragement and structure, and then to try to work with them to not only rebuild their self confidence, but to unravel the potential in them and show them, hey, you know, never give up on yourself, and even when you're disadvantaged, you still have some qualities that you've carried over that can help you start to fight that battle. And I think one thing that we overlook a lot of times is collaboration. That's what VR is supposed to be about: collaboration, bringing us together. That's what the technology, serious gaming and gaming, is about: bringing people together. What are we coming together for? Are we coming together for chaos and social media toxicity, or are we coming together to create solutions and to create new creative ideas and new platforms and new structures? So at that time, we're going to go ahead and cut now. Thank you so much for bearing with us, and I hope you enjoyed our discussion on this panel. Thank you.